There it is. Hey! Hey, we did it. We're live. We're here. We made it. You might notice it looks a little bit different in here. Because it is. I'm using StreamYard today. My VMix decided it didn't want to work today, so we're using a clearly not as superior program, but, you know, we don't have to be snobs about it. We don't have to be snobs about it. I'm here with Steven, and I'm so excited. I only have one announcement today, and that is the next Goblin Slayer will be next Thursday instead of Wednesday because Spelljammer is coming out, and we're going to be looking at the Spelljammer book with Dapper Dino. So that's going to be a whole lot of fun, and I can't wait to see the stat block for the giant miniature base hamsters. Steven, how are you?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm excited. I've been I'm having a bit of a morning, but other than that, I'm just happy to be here. I was super happy to be able to go have fun on Spontaneum, so if you haven't checked that out, go find the VOD. It's on Twitch, but it's also on YouTube. If you just search Spontaneum, it'll be there. If you can't find it, go to the community tab. I put a link to it there. You can find it. I tagged them and everything. Trevor introduced me to you, and I read your bio and a little bit about who you are, but you play in his home game, correct? Yes. So do you mind telling everybody a little bit about yourself, because they are probably a little bit unfamiliar with you?
That's fair. I'm not in this space that often. I'm Stephen Granade. I'm a physicist and writer and tabletop RPG geek. I actually had to go and dig out to find, I don't have what I started with, which was the red box, but I do have the updated first edition AD&D with the sticker that says, this original uncut player's handbook in TSR's attractive new cover.
I can't believe you've got the sticker on it still.
Yes.
That's amazing.
It's real beat up because I read that a bunch. Yeah, so I do like space stuff, a lot of like cameras and sensors in my day job. I mostly have written indie text video games, one of which is coming out soon from Choice of Games, if I can finish it.
Send me the link and I'll add it to the description below. So
I will absolutely do that. It's available for pre-order on Steam. And then have just done a lot of RPG playing and occasional writing. Probably the only credit anyone will know is that I did one of the official play sets for Fiasco, which was called Town and Gown, where you were in a college town and bad things happen because it's a college town.
I live in a college town. I know. I know how this goes. Your bio said you worked with NASA and got lit on fire by a coworker.
Yes. In physics graduate school, we were taking atoms and cooling them down until the quantum mechanical properties of like a single atom became instead visible at the large scale of like thousands upon thousands of atoms. And we did this using very powerful lasers that were both invisible and usually used for like welding in car factories. And so one time we were trying to, because of course we're bouncing this beam of light all around this table to get it aligned exactly. And it's invisible except for you can hold this special card up in front of it and you'll see it. And I was working with my coworker who twisted the little knobs, and I was like, go right, forgetting that he was facing me. So my right was his left. And so the next thing I knew, I looked down and my shirt is just like,
oh no,
going across it.
Oh my God.
I do not recommend it. It was very scary, but I came out completely unscathed.
One of the few ttrpg players that can actually say they've been hit by a laser beam.
Yes.
That's insane. That's so awesome. That's so awesome. I have decided that all the smart, cool people have played D&D, but it is not a requirement to be allowed to play D&D. So assholes can play D&D, but all cool, smart people play D&D.
Yeah, I started playing in Trevor's home game because we attend Dragon Con in Atlanta, one of the big media cons.
Yes.
And I organized the science track there, and there were a bunch of science people. And so when the pandemic hit, Trevor reached out to a bunch of folks, was like, I'd like to play D&D. And I was like, yes, please. And so we started 2 years ago, a group of us from the science track, a couple of other friends, playing this home game where we are all like small town adventurers from Whitebridge tromping around in the age of dragons coming back.
It's so amazing. I actually can't, because Dragon Con's actually coming up in September, right?
Yes, first week in September, which is not frightening at all.
Get your tickets now if you're gonna go. Go to their panel. Yeah. It's gonna be a good time. Yep. I don't know. I've like heard about all of this, and I'm just like, how have I missed everything? I've missed everything. How has this happened? But this was I can't. I don't know. I'm just really excited. I'm nerding. I can't handle anything that's going on right now. Tell me about your a little bit about your character in the home game, though, because Trevor gave us a little bit of hints about that and was like, you have got to talk to him about this. And I'm like, go on.
Yes. When I joined in, I have certain like classes that I tend to default to if I'm not careful. It's like, I will play a monk, I will play a magic user. Like, these are the things that I have often done. And so more and more lately, I've been like, what if I did something I haven't done before to kind of push me outside of my comfort zone, to have to figure out different sets of mechanics and different ways of playing and different ways of expressing character through the options that are available to the classes. I was like, well, I've never played a ranger. And so I was sort of thinking about, okay, so what kind of a ranger do I want to be? I think I want to be a wood elf. And then going through all of this, I basically settled on, what if a wood elf ranger, but Ron Swanson? It's like outdoor.
That was the inspiration.
That was the inspiration, was Ron Swanson. So he's kind of gruff. He has high insight and low charisma, which is really fun from a role-playing standpoint, where you can understand people and, you know, get their motivations, but you're not really good necessarily at rallying people or expressing things well or taking their feelings into account the way that you should.
Right.
So I found that to be really kind of interesting. And so I put this character together and threw it over to Trevor, and Trevor's like, okay. Because I also was like, I kind of like the Gloomstalker vibe. What was that? Was that wasn't Tasha's, whichever one.
Gloomstalkers and Xanathars.
Xanathars. Here we go. I had to steal all the books, so I have a teen son who has the giant stack of books, and I'm like, okay,
I got like a.
Yep.
I got a decent set going. I got my my sister's hubby, significant other, got me the Heroes Feast book. I'm like, oh, I gotta try that. So,
absolutely.
That'll be fun.
Yeah. So I said, this is kind of what I'm thinking. Here's the stats I'm thinking of. Here's the thing I'm thinking of. It's like, great, you are an ambassador to the Underdark. And I was like, that actually works really well.
That's so good.
I know. Trevor is very good about, if you throw some things to him, he's like, cool, what if?
Let's make it work. Yeah.
Brings it back with a spin and makes it make sense in the world of that we're all living in. And I was like, great, that actually informs a lot. Like, we just in our latest session ended up in the snooty moon elf court, which eventually ended up with my character Fletcher politely telling off the court. Like, this again, he understands how courts function. He has worked as an ambassador,
but
and
also
he can be a bit of a jerk.
but also maybe they need to be told off.
Right.
As a character played as an emissary between the Seelie and the Unseelie court, which then eventually expanded to playing like a Hermes type character for a little while, jumping between planes, and like dealing with gods and sending messages. High level stuff. This is like, I don't even play this. This is just all like background for a character that is now an NPC. Because you can't be this kind of a character in an actual game. It doesn't work. I sometimes the court needs to get told off.
This was very much the case.
I got I feel like such a little nooblet. Because you've got like you got such a collection behind you, and I'm sitting here like, look at my little stack of books. I got some dice.
Yeah, these are all like regular books.
These books are boring. These are D&D books.
It's like, here's the, some of the more RPG books. I actually had to go through my stack because like I also spent a long time for a while playing the D6 version of Star Wars that a bunch of us played in high school, and then the original 7C.
Ooh.
I only played online because the I was part of this group on a mud, and that was all centered on text games. And one of the people on the mud was one of the co-designers of that 7C first reboot, I guess.
Oh,
And so like,
that's...
we're gonna play that, and then played that for a bunch of years.
Well, if you played it for a bunch of years, it must have been a good time.
We had a very good time. It's like swashbuckling adventures in alternate history Europe, where like France has magic that involves tearing open dimensional portals that drip blood. So,
Useful.
right, it's very, very startling.
How do you feel about the Astral Sea and Spelljammer coming out?
I missed Spelljammer. Like
Mm.
of the systems that I played, I did a lot of the TSR. They had Star Frontiers and all those kinds of things. I was like, there's my sci-fi.
Yeah.
And then I wasn't playing much for a while, and so missed all of that. But I just really want to play it. I really want to play it very badly. Like a lot of those areas I had to see through games like Baldur's Gate
Yeah.
or Planescape Torment, like a lot of the BioWare early CRPGs, is where I was like, oh, this is what's happening with D&D now.
I mean, it's not wrong. It's not the raging, what is it? The Minx and Boo,
Yes.
the ranger with a rage.
Yes, go for the eyes.
Go for the eyes, boo. I just love that the voice actor for that is the same voice actor. It's Jim Cummings. So it's the same voice actor that did Winnie the Pooh and Tigger. And that's
Right.
also the same actor who did the singing part for Scar because Jeremy Irons was sick. I'm like, this
Right.
guy's amazing. He also did the singing voice for Rasputin in Anastasia.
I did not realize that.
It's so good. It's just, you can't, like, it's not Christopher Lloyd. It's amazing. Rodent has a question for you. He asked you, do you think your science background makes it more difficult to play sci-fi RPGs?
That's actually a really good question, because I
Yeah.
know it does for some people. It
Mhm.
doesn't for me. There's a certain level of separation, I think, that I have made between like what I do in real life and then what's going on in the fiction. I know there are some science folks who are like, really what I want is like hard science fiction where the science is taken into account. And I
Yeah.
enjoy that. Like I have had fun with watching The Expanse, but also I'm here for just completely super fun space opera kind of things, completely divorced
Yeah.
from any science stuff.
You're like, listen, that's my real job.
Right.
I want to get away from that.
Well, and I'm so interested in stories and storytelling
Mm.
that, and that's one of the things. So I've done a little bit of science advising for story folks, novels, movies, and kind of things like that. And one of the things that you have to learn is a lot of times you have to be willing to say, well, here's what the science says, but what do you need for the story, and how can we adjust it to get you what you need?
Right, right. Do you have any, like, little pet peeves?
I actually don't. I think just
Oh.
because, again, I grew up watching all of this really cheesy science fiction and loving it, and I still do enjoy a lot of that, to where I'm like, I can roll with most anything. I guess if I had a pet peeve, it would be when there is a piece of science that they could have pulled in that would explain it and still make the story go, but instead they were like, never mind, I don't care about that.
We're not gonna explain it. It just is.
You're like, lightning doesn't behave that way, but if you did this one thing, then it would absolutely work the way you want it to work.
Oh, so that's really interesting. So there's like a couple little like holes that you're like, I could fill that hole with this thing. So you just kind
Right.
of
I could
mentally
offer you
do.
something tied to actual science that would like deepen some of the science, but still give you what you want.
Do you try to physics magic sometimes?
Sometimes, like I like stories where the magic is just is. Like I just recently read Ursula Vernon's Nettle and Bone, which is an excellent book, and the magic is very uncanny.
Okay.
I'm like, that's great. And then sometimes I will be more interested in something that is more systematized, where you're like, okay, I have set up and can kind of derive almost scientific rules about how this magic works.
Right. I find that with like certain spells in 5th edition, or I guess in any edition, they'll say, like, this causes a fireball, and here's how the fire behaves. And once the spell is cast, then you can start applying, like, the physics to it, because the fire is still it's still fire. It's not doing anything particularly unique outside of that you made it appear.
Right. Well, and I love that kind of creative use of like abilities and spells where you're like, okay, this is the main thing the spell does, but I could also maybe make this in-world effect happen to get what I want.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. So I saw somebody asking a question. They were asking a technical question about 5th edition rules. But I kind of expanded on it because I was like, well, maybe. Because the question was, if somebody casts Wish to remove the existence of counterspell, can I counterspell the wish?
Oh, so basically you set up like a logical paradox of...
Right.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, technically speaking, counterspell happens while the spell is being cast. So
right.
From like an order of events, your counterspell would go off before the wish spell, therefore you would be able to cast it. However, what are the consequences of removing counterspell from existence?
Right.
Does that retroactively then cause every counterspell that has been cast throughout the game to have actually gone off, and then the timeline changes?
Ooh.
Or, and I know I'm a bit of a fan of this one because it's less problematic for time travel, is any counterspell that has happened throughout all of existence, now all those spells go off at the same time.
Right.
It's just a big nuke.
Right. All of a sudden, pow, 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 pow.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Anytime you start fiddling with like time stuff, it gets such a headache. Oh my gosh.
I am doing a little bit of wibbly wobbly timey wimey stuff, but I've made it enclosed in its own bubble. So that way I don't have to worry about this. I told Trevor about this, and I hope it doesn't end up affecting your game.
Uh-oh.
Because basically what it is I trap players in their own player agency.
Okay.
So they are existing within I haven't gotten to play, this is all just set up. I haven't actually gotten to play it yet, so we'll see how it goes. But basically they are in a demi-plane, and the demi-plane is in a time loop. Everything outside of the demi-plane is still behaving as it should, but within this bubble, time is repeating, and the only person who is like aware that this is happening is the Lich, because it's his demi-plane.
Oh.
Yes. So that's where the players start. They start the campaign unbeknownst to them inside a Lich's demi-plane. Like, they've grown up here. It's basically like a demi-plane of dread. But it's, it's not bad. It's not Cursed Strahd. It's actually pretty friendly. Most of the place is fine.
Demi-planes go, I guess.
Yeah, right? But if the players die, right? If there's a TPK, they go back to a set point, and then that's where they're playing from, because they TPK'd, but now they're just starting to gain realization that, no, they've done this before.
Right.
So now if they go into a cave and they're like, well, we're going to go right instead of left this time, it's like, okay, roll a percentile dice. And then roll a Constitution saving throw.
Oh my gosh.
So, because you feel compelled to go to the left because that's what you did the first time.
Right.
So it makes for a really, like, bizarre thing, because now you start getting into, what happens if only one player dies?
Right. Are they just like in like a waiting room of limbo to pop back in when everybody's dead and it resets? Or does one person reset it all at that point?
Or do they get out of the plane, realize that their buddy is still in there? When they find out what's going on, does that person then decide to play two characters? Do they, like, what happens?
An element of reincarnation where you were lifted above the wheel and can see the turning of it and be like, oh, now I see it all and remember all. Right.
Well, what would you choose to do? Would you choose to play two characters, or would you, like, who's your favorite? Which character do you want to play? Who are you gonna leave in this Lich's demi-plane, you horrible person?
Right.
You made this character.
That's a lot of... I like stories where players have to make weighty choices, like they feel the weight of the choice.
Yeah.
That can make for some really just solid experiences where you're like, oh, I remember when we did such and such. Like you've got on the one hand, this was a really cool thing, and we managed to like kill a dragon when we didn't think we were going to be able to. And the other hand, it was like, here's where I did something, and it has haunted me ever since.
Right, and you may or may not have a chance to make that change, and like depending how big that choice is and how much it ripple changes the whatever's happening in the demiplane, absolutely will cause more or less of a percent, like the percentile dice, and heighten that saving throw of like whether or not you're capable. Because at that point you start, if you fail that saving throw, suddenly you're having an out of body experience where you're watching your character do what you did when you're like, but I don't want to do that. It's like, no, you're stepping on that spike trap. Sorry, bro. You failed that saving throw. The demi-lich, or sorry, the lich who runs the demiplane used to be a divination wizard.
Wow. So a divination lich, in effect.
Correct.
Wow.
Yeah, the demiplane is like the size of the continent of Australia. Because they basically took a pre-existing continent. Shit was happening. Far realm shit was happening. Asmodeus was on the material plane. Shit was going down. So a group of these 9th level wizards got together and were like, okay, we're gonna cast this insane spell to give us a chance to survive. And they took this entire piece of the material plane and popped it out. And the only wizard that survived the spell is the one who had to sacrifice himself to become a lich to get the demi-plane spell that they needed to be able to do it.
Amazing.
So,
well, I guess if you're like stuck there and you're a lich and you were a divination wizard, like, well, let's explore divination some more. Let's see what that looks like.
Right, and he's like, he's got the players get to meet him really early on, because he's the only goblin that they get to meet that's actually like a character. The rest of the goblins are just like regular goblins because he's like, I mean, I'm not going to help them. I don't give a shit.
Right.
They're just gonna keep making the same shitty choices. I tried. Fuck them.
Right.
But other than that, they meet him as like a side vendor doing divination magic, and he's just like, I'll tell you your future for 50 gold. You're going to die. That person over there, they're about to die. He just casts Finger of Death, and the person just drops. See? I told you.
What a jerk.
He's got the deck of many things.
Of course.
So he's just like, I'll let you pick a card for 50 gold. But they're gonna meet him before they should realistically have that much money to just burn on this deck that they don't know what it is.
Right.
I am a cheating DM, though. I stacked the deck. The deck is stacked, so nobody's gonna get voided. It'll be fine.
Very, very kind of you.
No Death Knights are coming for the party yet.
Right.
They can't they can't get in. Because now all magic is limited by what amount of power the lich has.
Right.
So there's also like a huge barrier between any clerical spells or any paladins between them and their god, because they're on a demiplane that people don't know exists. The gods don't know this demiplane is here.
Right. They're separated.
Anyway, I'm talking too much.
No, I love this. I'm like a systems person. Like I'm interested to see, like, if you set some of these things up and then work with players to get them to buy into it, then what stories emerge from that?
Right.
I think that's really interesting.
There's like a big cosmic fight going on with the gods, because of course there is. They're always fighting with each other. Right. But it's basically what's happening is their power is getting siphoned, and they don't know who or what is doing it. And so they all start fighting with each other because they're all like, well, you're doing it. Oh, no, you're doing it. Asmodeus is currently AWOL. Like, he's just not interacting. So the 9 hells are like an absolute shit show. And so they're all trying to figure out who's going to be the next ruler of hell, because Asmodeus just isn't interacting with them anymore. So they're like, well, who's in charge? Well, Dad is gone.
Right. Kids are squabbling.
Right. I've still got the Blood War running. So because the Blood War is still running, the demons are like, what if one of us rules the 9 hells? Wouldn't that be fun? So I've got Lulth and Grazitz being like, me, no me, no me, no me.
Nice.
Should we work together on this? No, fuck you.
Right.
Demons.
Maybe yes until I stab you in the back.
Right, yeah, exactly. And so, like, the whole thing is just, it's an absolute shit show, but the material plane doesn't know what's going on because Asmodeus, one of the reasons why Asmodeus isn't there is because when the Far Realm stuff was going on, Asmodeus came to the material plane and was like, yeah, I'm gonna stop that. And he basically, like, forcibly reset the barriers, which means, like, the initial Dawn War barriers are back in place, which were shaky at best by the time, like, 5th edition rolls around.
Yeah.
So it's like a whole thing. So I'm gonna get like a paladin playing, and their god is gonna be like, sorry, I can't give you a 6th level spell slot or a 5th level spell slot right now. I'm busy.
Right. Your call is very important to us.
Right, exactly. And I've got alignments are just flying all over the place. Okay, how do you feel about alignments? Because like people are about that.
Yeah, I think because one of my cautions with it is that sometimes I think people use that as a very blunt tool.
Yeah.
That it's like, well, I am lawful good, so always this, and people can let that limit the complexity that they can express as a character. Like in the games that I have been in and the games that I have run, I if we do use alignments, it's trying to have that as sort of like a general, this is in sort of the ground level of the character. This is where they often go to.
It's a guideline.
But it's okay if you branch out from that in the moment.
Oh yeah, because I find it's more of like a general way they like to view the world from like their ideal versus like how you react situation to situation.
Right.
So I asked this last time we were here, but I'm gonna ask you as well because everybody's got different takes on what is lawful good, right? So I'm gonna read these off to you, and you're gonna tell me if you agree or disagree.
Okay.
All right. Lawful good. I try to do the right thing the right way.
I would agree with that.
Okay. Neutral good. I do the right thing any way I can.
Maybe.
Okay.
I just wonder if that shades more into sort of the chaotic, you know, whatever it takes, man.
Yeah, so chaotic good is I do the right thing, goddammit.
Yeah.
Okay. So if chaotic good is I do the right thing, goddammit, and lawful good is I try to do the right thing the right way. Neutral good, you would move a little bit less towards the chaotic side. So instead of any way you can, it's the best way possible, maybe?
Maybe. Because I feel like when I have been a lawful chaotic character, it's just been like, well, good has to happen and we'll stampede over everything. And in most of my experience, when you try to like put strictures around it, then it doesn't work. And I feel like neutral, you're more willing to either go with the rules and the systems that are in place, but then move around them when you're like, I don't actually.
This isn't going to work. We need to be flexible about it.
Right.
That makes sense. Lawful neutral. I do what I'm told.
I can see that.
Neutral. I do what I please.
Okay.
Chaotic.
A little bit. Go ahead.
Okay. Chaotic neutral. Don't tell me what to do.
Right.
They get the chaotic ones really good.
Yeah.
So are there any of those three that you would?
Trying to decide on the neutral. And I guess one of the things that I struggle with, if in the neutral axis along either direction, is the idea of the flexibility that I partake of some of either direction, depending on whether it's the lawful evil axis or it's the lawful chaotic axis or
right.
Good evil axis is sort of like, well, I can flex along all of that, which is why I think a lot of people end up sort of in those cases dumbing themselves into one or more of the neutral buckets because they're like, well, this doesn't fit me all the time.
Right. I think it's really interesting to see characters of alternate alignments running societies that are alignments that are not what they are personally, because that right. I find that works a lot better because it's like things aren't that simple. Just because you're in charge of a lawful good society doesn't mean you yourself are lawful good. You could be chaotic good. You could be chaotic good and be like, listen, everybody else needs to follow the rules, because if they don't, it becomes a mess. I, on the other hand, am going out of my way to break rules and change them to make society better.
Right. I'm allowed to be a loose cannon.
Right. Nobody else is, though. You guys.
Yeah. Well, and so that comes down to, I think, does a character view their alignment as speaking to them or speaking to how society as a whole should be organized?
Right, because that's a whole different. It's almost like every character ought to have two alignments, one for you personally and one for your view on on a larger philosophical. If your character has philosophy, some characters don't have any philosophy. Some characters are
Right.
unga bunga, hit with stick.
Yep.
I don't think about it any more than that. And that's fair. That could be true neutral. True neutral could be like, no, I'm not considering any of this. I'm just gonna hit it with the stick because I want to, or I need to.
Right. I just feel like it.
Yeah, I just feel like it. Lawful evil. Everyone is a tool. Neutral evil. If you're not a tool, you're a corpse. Chaotic evil. Everyone is a corpse.
I like the play on that. So I wonder if I've never tried this, and so I'm speaking off the cuff. So this it may have been done a bunch already, and I just haven't run into it, or it may be a very dumb idea. But I wonder if, like, the next time I create a character in a situation where we're using alignment, to like write down what that alignment means to that character, and sort of try to solidify in my mind what that's like.
It could also be like the character's not really aware of it, but it might be something you need to be aware of as the player, right? So your character might not have thought about it, but
yeah, the character, like you said, may not be one that has a philosophy or recognizes why they act on impulses the way that they do.
Right. That's a lot of self-examination. Unless you're playing a monk or maybe a very devout cleric, this may not be something that your character has taken the time to do. Or had the time to do, to be fair. That's maybe D&D privilege.
Right. Well, and so one of my undergraduate degrees is in theater. And so a lot of times I approach a character as if it was, a character I had been handed to play.
Yeah.
The nice thing about D&D as a collaborative storytelling engine is that you sort of develop that understanding as you go, and as you spend more time with acting. A lot of times it's, you get the script, and so then you're trying to figure out who the character is and decide what choices about the character you're going to make to fill in the blanks of those spaces between what the character is actually saying and what either stage direction or what the writer has talked to you about. And so there is that sort of separation of, what do I know that the character doesn't know?
Yeah.
How do I use that to inform my performance, but then not have that be mechanistic, so that I have an understanding that then I can express in the moment the true emotions and react to the people around me.
Yeah.
And keep that sort of separation.
Would you recommend for people that are getting into a D&D game that they want to take more seriously? Because sometimes things are not serious. Like, I thought about Murphy for that one shot yesterday way more than I ever needed to, because then I'm like, I love this man. He's a dick. He is edging narcissism. He is very much, he's a rock star. He knows he's the best. People insult him and he's just like, you're not even insulting me. Like, this is a compliment as far as I'm like, you can't hurt this man's feelings because he's got too much self-esteem. But he's like kind of falls in that tsundere area where he's like, well, I helped you, but not because I wanted to. It was just convenient. I don't know what you mean.
Yeah.
He's like, ultimately, he's a good character, but he's also like an agent of chaos. So, but would you recommend taking like a class at your local community center? Would you recommend for people who wanted to go that extra step? Or maybe a set of questions to ask yourself about your.
Yeah. So I definitely think that can help. One of the things that I ended up drawing on a lot is my time spent doing long form storytelling improv.
Oh.
So, you've got the kind of improv games, your, whose line is it anyway, comedy sports kind of things, and those
Yes.
are great and fun, and I love them. Um, the times I was doing that do less to inform what I do in D&D than the cases where it is you're on stage with 2 or 3 people and you are creating a story out of whole cloth and you have nothing. Like, it is
Yeah.
terrifying because you kind of have to watch each other and then join in and figure out your characters and your story as it goes.
Yeah.
Um, there's actually a really good example of that on Netflix, which is Middleditch and Schwartz.
Oh,
Ben
okay.
Schwartz and I'm blanking on Middleditch's first name. So they do long form storytelling improv that they did as essentially a Netflix special. And so you can watch them develop in real time these stories and these characters playing off of each other and bringing in new characters. It's very hard. I haven't done it in a while, but a lot of times in D&D, I find myself sort of going back to that, to being like, okay, what have I just discovered about this character, and what do I do with that going forward?
Right. I mean, so have you come across a character where you kind of did surface level, but then as you played, it just got like really intense?
So most recently Fletcher, because
Yes.
like I said, started out as Elf Ron Swanson, so
Right.
he's
Right.
gruff dad kind of character. But then over time, as we've been playing this the last couple of years, it's this band of little, people from a little town now thrown into this big world changing thing. And we've been semi-realistic about the fact that our characters are having to deal with a lot of traumatic stuff. And that is changing them, and how do they react to that? And what I realized, because Fletcher had always sort of
Oh,
operated as
there it is.
a single person, like so he was an ambassador, he was an envoy, but
Right.
that is sort of a singular position within a community and a group of people who you're not really part of, representing another group who you're not there with. So it was always sort of
Right.
a similar experience. And now he's had this journey where it's a band of people that he has come to care for. How does he respond to
Oh
all
no.
of the stuff that is going on, and all of the danger, and the way that people, we've had characters almost die
It's
in
the
a number
moment
of
of the
cases.
Grinch. Oh no, the sleigh, the presents, they'll be
Right.
destroyed. And I care.
Right, exactly. And so I was like, okay, looking at what he's been doing and his stats, what will happen, what should he do? And I finally decided that what felt right to me was that he would try to help out by becoming a lot more murdery. So he moved
All right.
into rogue assassin kind of things, because it was like, okay, these people are going through a lot of stuff. The best way to help them is to get rid of the obstacles in their way as fast as possible so they don't have to deal with it.
The best defense is a good offense.
Yes.
The best crowd control is murder.
Yes. So it's not that he's like looking for opportunities to murder, but he's like, if we're going to be in fights, my goal is to wipe out people as fast and comprehensively as possible
Right.
so that the others are safe.
I mean, that's not bad logic.
It's
Um,
not, but it's also a really damaged way of looking at the world, right?
oh, absolutely. And it's like, and that kind of character still has so much room to grow because you guys are level 10 right now.
Yes.
Yeah. So I got your character sheet and I pulled it up so people can see it on screen. Um, you have a passive insight of 21 and a passive perception of 26. For anybody out there who
No.
does not know what passive perception is and passive insight is, it's how can you tell if someone is lying to you is insight, and perception is you're looking around and you're how observant are you basically. And these are how observant Fletcher is without trying. Like just walking into a room, he's just like looks around and he sees people's fucking health bars.
Right. And now some of that is Trevor's fault, because he was kind enough to provide Fletcher with a magic cloak that helps with perception. So like some of that Trevor brought on himself,
Fair.
but it's made for an interesting change in storytelling, because a lot of times it's what can I hide from the players? Now in this case, it's what can I have Fletcher notice that he's going to have to decide how he's going to act on it in a situation where he may not be able to tell everybody else, or he's up ahead
Right.
of the party as we're traveling cross country, what's he gonna do when he sees that there's like goblins and trapdoors waiting to do stuff?
So have you
And
noticed that there's like been a little bit of a shift in like Trevor's style of DMing? That's fascinating.
yeah, I don't know if he's doing this consciously. I kind of suspect so, but even if it's unconscious, I feel like he's started to do more of like, I can't hide this stuff. So instead, let it be something that, when noticed, brings up an interesting question and provokes an interesting reaction.
Right. Yeah, you have to kind of change your mindset about the way your players are going to respond when they know what's coming. That's one of the
Right.
things I was trying to do with the demiplane is that, well, now they know. And I was also kind of playing with the preconceptions and notions of alignment, because that's going to get all messed up. But as
Right.
well as, like, players are going to metagame to a degree. You can't help it. It's a bias. There's no getting, you can do your best, but there's no
Right.
getting around it. You see a goblin, it's a goblin, right? And your character should know it's a goblin. And so having the goblin is now a lich, it kind of like fucks with things a little bit. It starts taking these metagamey concepts and starts saying, okay, but maybe it can be what you make it.
Right.
And so
What
how does this change Fletcher as a character?
um I think it actually pushes him back towards that sense of isolation and aloneness.
Right.
And again, a lot of that is driven by the decisions that he made and that I made in terms of pushing him in this direction. Be like, well, the way I want to protect people is to be the one who is sort of at the pointy end of the stick that we're jabbing people with.
Right.
So he's further out ahead because he's stealthier, and has more perception, which means he's more often is running into these things, or is far enough ahead that then if like an ambush is going to happen, boy, that's fun. Kind of time to leg it back.
Right.
And I think that has sort of added to his isolation, even though he doesn't recognize that necessarily. That
Right.
he
Right.
decided, well, I'm going to take all this on myself, which is a bad way to be in community with a bunch of other people, and he's going to reap the consequences of that going forward.
Oh yeah. Well, it's also like, besides that there's social um consequences to that kind of behavior, but
Right.
there's also a physical danger. When you are that far ahead, when you're looking that far forward, sometimes you're not seeing what's in front of you and what's not in front of you or around you, which may be, oh shit, I'm alone.
Right.
Oh, whoops. I got too far ahead. Because you got like decent speed as well, right? So you're a wood elf, so
Yes. Very,
you're already
very
5 feet faster than everybody else, assuming you don't get any shenanigans later down the line.
right.
So speed. Haste.
Right. Well, and it's good that we've got a table that is very interested in developing the story and developing characters. And
Yes.
now,
Yeah.
I have certainly played in games where it's been more mechanistic. I
Crunchy.
actually
Yeah.
enjoyed a lot of like fourth edition Mamorpaga style. We're doing all of these kinds of things, and we've got our little cards that we're playing and all of that. Like,
Yeah.
I also enjoyed that kind of gameplay, and I don't think that it's a value judgment. I think it's a preference, and this just happens to be a case where a bunch of us, all of us science style people are like, what we really want to do is like story and character.
We do enough
The-
math in our real lives.
right,
We get us out. This is an escapist game. Let us play.
right, and certainly I'm like thinking of the mechanics, when I put this together. Certainly,
Yeah.
I certainly
You're
leaned
following the
into the
rules.
combinations that had good synergy and could balance some of the known issues with playing a ranger if you're trying to power game your way up to 20. So I'm
Yeah.
certainly not averse to doing the math, but that's not the enjoyment. Doesn't just come from I did the math and now look at the math playing out in the combats and in the
Right.
encounters. It's how does that now inform what kind of character would look like this? And
Yeah,
does
like
it
you've taken your numbers and been like, okay, these numbers change things about a person.
right? Well,
Because,
and
sorry, go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say, I mentioned that I'm trying now more to play different,
Roles.
different archetypes and different roles than I have in the past. And so, especially I am very gregarious. I talk very fast. This isn't like I try to make jokes. And so I'm like, here's a character who does not, who is fairly quiet and fairly taciturn, and who was supposed to have made his living by talking, but also has low charisma. So that's like,
Yes.
how do you bundle that up? And what does a person? And I was like, I actually do think that works. Like you're like, I still like this person, even though at times it's not that he's being a jerk, it's just that he doesn't present well.
Right, right. I have a Ladrin monk, and she is the one who's an emissary, but because she's a monk, sure, charisma is not that great, but she's an Eladrin. She's very pretty. She is a
Right.
drunk monk and is a blunt asshole. So I made her a
Right.
drunk monk, and I was just like, she's just like, listen, I'm very good looking, but also, fuck you. Don't touch me. Get away from me. I don't like you.
Right.
Don't talk to me. So I've just got her like constantly like drinking. She's smoking. She's just like, what? Like that's
Yeah,
how
all
she
the
is.
worst choices.
Right, exactly. She gets I eventually dipped her into because this is a character that I don't get to play. And so I just use her as an NPC. She's actually level 26, and I gave her 6 the way the way I upped her level is I multi-classed her. So she's a level 20 monk, but then I gave her 6 levels in warlock. And I gave her Pact of the Tome.
Ooh.
So she gets ritual casting. Because she's level 26, by this point in time, she's pretty much found every ritual in her book that she could possibly find. And it allows her to not have to still not rely on charisma. Because she's still not really a spellcaster.
Right.
Like, she doesn't use Eldritch Blast. What I gave her instead was I gave her, like, the Eyes of the Tome or something. I can't remember what it's called, but it's like, you can read every language, including magic ones. And then as a monk, she can also, eventually, she gets to be able to speak and understand any language. So I'm like, so I can also ritual cast comprehend language. So it's like, I brought her over from 4th edition, since you were talking about speed. And in 4th edition, I initially made her to be like, how fast can I possibly make this character? She is the Flash. And in 4th edition, you had like dailies and stuff.
Right.
5th edition, don't got that. So I ended up with like on a turn, because I gave her a ring of spell storing. It's got haste in it. I think it's got 2 charges of haste, because I didn't want like burst speed. I wanted like long distance. How far can she go for a long enough period of time? So I'm like, haste is concentration and it can last for a little while, so that counts. I ended up getting up to like almost like 1,000 feet in a second, like for more than one round. I'm like, I am fast as fuck, but she's also level 26, so I gave her the epic boon of speed. She's got boots of speed. She's got yada da 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 da, and it's just like, I'm also a monk, and it's just like, you cannot. Like, you might be able to go faster if you dipped into barbarian instead, but I'm like, nah, I gotta keep it with the character, and like it matches the theme. She spends a lot of her time running away from and traveling to give messages, so she gotta be fast.
Right.
So the whole plane of Mechanus is trying to kill her with a. So
nice.
Got how fast can you be to outrun an inevitable that can teleport to you?
Lots, yes.
Much fast. Very boom.
Yeah, I think there's something really fun to saying, okay, what kind of mechanics do I want to have? And then how do I translate that into a character where it's not, it's not just like a bag of stats going around murder hoboing everybody.
Yeah, well, you listen, if you like murder hobo, that's fine. But sometimes it's really fun to be like, okay, but why do I murder hobo?
Right.
Or what is thematic? Themed characters to me are probably some of the most fun way of playing the game, because you can have your character, and your character can change over time, but you can also, if your character has a theme to it, you can start picking and choosing spells or picking and choosing abilities that it's like your character's supposed to be growing over time. They're learning these things because of the way they're behaving. So it makes sense. So I like to give out additional feats because I like players to feel like they're very strong. So I do want at like level, I think I said level 8, level 5. I basically replaced the Epic Destiny and the Paragon Path and like all that stuff that you got in 4th edition with a feat. So like around that level, have a feat. Or handing out a free feat. It's like, listen, you're spending a whole lot of time making perception check after perception check after perception check after insight. You get the observant feat. Here you go.
Right.
You've just been doing this. Congratulations.
I think that's really neat because you're letting the fiction inform the like sort of back inform the mechanics.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you scale the encounters properly to take that into account, then okay.
Right. I mean, and that can be tricky, but listen, I'm an asshole. I am not a. I like to think that I am I am fair, but fuck around and find out.
Right.
The world is a dangerous place.
Right. Well, and I think for me, it ultimately comes down to, do folks at the table, are we doing what everyone has signed up to do, and are they good with the approach that's being taken?
Yes, yeah, it is consensual.
Right. And I think that within that, I give a whole lot of latitude, you know, from, like you said, people who really just want, like I said, I played a 4th edition game that was very, we go here and we fight and we use the, you know, here's our dailies, here's our, you know, bap with the cards, and then go someplace else and do that again.
Yeah.
To something like I'm doing now in Trevor's game, which is balancing a lot of the mechanics and the stories, to playing just straight out story-based games. You know, your things like Fiasco and such, where it's like, we've got the set of mechanics to tell these certain kinds of stories.
I think that it's really interesting to see sort of where something starts and where something eventually goes. Because you end up with, like, you never know. Like, you never know. You could have a character make, like, such a heel turn because of, like, one thing. One thing happens and that character is just like, well, I'm broken as a person. Bye. I'm leaving. Right. I'm done. I give up. Get me out of here. I don't want to be an adventurer anymore, Mom.
I'm going home.
Going home. And I actually had a character do that. I'm like, no, I'm done. Because like, this is the same character. She's like, my home was destroyed. All my friends are dead. This is all happening. And the party that I'm traveling with doesn't even give a shit. Because they were like, I was the taxi at that point. Like, I was just taking people around, and I'm like, my abilities aren't even useful here. Because I was a monk, and most of it was 4th edition. So there's a lot of push and pulling and knocking prone.
Right.
Which doesn't work when you're fighting aberrants.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh, my character gives up. I'm going, bye. Goodbye. I give up. I, like, grabbed whatever scraps that I could, took care of what I could, and then just left the party.
Right.
And then bad things happen, but now she's an NPC, so.
Right. Yeah, I get a lot of, part of the lonely fun part that I enjoy is, like, trying to come up with characters and say, all right, what would be interesting about playing this person, and is this a person who would mesh well with the other folks at the table?
Yeah, it's important to be able to mesh well with the who's playing, because that's a player thing and a character thing.
Right.
And I'm a fan of inter-character conflict. Like, I'm all for, because people don't get along easily.
Right.
So it makes sense that there's like conflict, like conflict between characters, but if it starts eking into people are actually having trouble with each other at the table, do you view that as like a player job or as a DM job? Or
I think the DM can help, especially if there's a lot of back and forth happening, it's spilling into, like, out of the table and into the personal, people are basically getting personal beefs. I do think that they have to work it out, but I think the DM effectively in an authority role can say, hey, it seems like this is happening, you know, try to facilitate the conversation to, like, first foreground, do y'all realize this is happening? It seems like it's making the rest of the table real uncomfortable. Like, people are basically backing away and waiting
for... Gotta call out the council.
But yeah, I have seen that. I have seen people assume that character conflict means player conflict, especially in some of like the actual play podcasts. You're like, oh, clearly these two people hate each other. I was like, it doesn't seem like it. It just seems like they are expressing their characters' response to
Distrust
each other.
or yeah.
And that can be very uncomfortable for other people. So again, you have to have a table that can be okay with that.
How do
Um,
you handle a DM, or how do you handle somebody playing a character who is actually against the party behind the scenes?
oh, that's a good question.
I mean, you've got Fletcher, who's like so fucking observant. There's
Right,
no way he wouldn't like know. But does he just out the person? Does he
right,
wait until there's because if you just out the person and nobody else agrees with you, like you said, he's very much getting more and more isolated as he's seeing these things. So does he
right,
end up accidentally isolating himself further by creating a conflict because he's blunt, or like
right. I think that would be an interesting thing to play out. I think about so one of our other players, Ray Pendergrass, they play Rin, who is the sort of thiefy bardy performancey type. And is very much a like prickly, things have been bad for me, so I don't trust anybody anywhere. And that has led to some interesting sort of inter-party dynamics where it's like, well, but we think we're still your friend, even though sometimes you don't act
right,
like it and frustrate us.
right,
And that's been a good source of tension within the game. But now imagine that it turns out that Rin has been conspiring against us. Like we just got back to the Moon Elf Kingdom where Rin is from and is part of royalty. What if Rin was to work against us at that point?
right.
Fletcher decides, okay, I'm going to pull through this charisma 9 versus the performance person who is very charismatic and very convincing.
Right. So you
Uh,
might actually just be dealing with this right in
right.
this situation right now that I just brought
Yeah.
up. Wow.
I don't think so.
Sure.
But I could certainly imagine a version of the story that we're in where that turned out to be the case.
Now,
Where
do you not think so, or does Fletcher not think so?
Um, well, Fletcher certainly does not. As a player, again, popping up to the metagame level, I don't think that's what would end up happening
Sure.
just from watching how Ray has been playing Rin. Uh, I don't think so, but I could imagine a different version of the story where that turns out to be the case, where it turns out Ren has been pretending to be estranged from her royal family, or is estranged from her royal family, and decides, you know what, the best way is actually to seize power, and the best way I can seize power is to betray the party.
I mean, yeah, fair. That's yeah, that makes sense. Or you could also tell play. It's not necessarily that difficult to manipulate player characters if
Right.
you're in the party, especially if you're in the party. I
Yeah.
mean, my favorite way as a DM to manipulate players is to take their shit. It doesn't
Right.
matter what it is. You could take a boot and they're gonna be pissed as hell. They're gonna be like, we're going to find this
Right.
motherfucker who took my god. They took one boot. Why did they take one boot? I was sleeping in the woods. Who could have possibly? How dare they'll just. There's a whole
Oh
campaign.
yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
whole
It's a very
campaign.
high Talos.
I've been working on me and a guy I know have been working on a boggle that lives in a bag of holding. Lives in a handy haversack.
Hmm.
He takes your shit that you've forgotten is in there.
Right. Nice.
But you can make friends with him. You can make friends with him. He speaks Sylvan and only Sylvan.
And
And
only so.
so if you speak Sylvan to him, you can make friends with him. But if you use comprehend language or a different way of magic to talk to him in Sylvan and he finds out about it, now he's aggressive to you. Now he doesn't like
Right.
you. Now he's gonna start fucking with you for real.
Right.
Before he was taking stuff you forgot about. Oh, I think I have a couple copper in my bag from a few months ago. There's no copper in your bag.
Right. It should be in there. Mhm. It also makes me think there was a role playing game in the 80s and 90s called Paranoia, which
Yes.
basically tried to flip a lot of these tropes on the head so that you had 7 clones because your character died a lot. And the assumption was everybody is trying to protect themselves in this post-apocalyptic, awful dystopia where friend computer rules everyone, and everyone has to give obeisance to friend computer, who has awful ideas and awful plans, and everything is terrible. And it was interesting to me because I ran that a bunch, watching the people. So everyone, I made it very clear. I was like, this is the game you're signing up for.
Yes.
Backstabbing happens a lot.
Yeah.
Trust is in short supply.
Yeah.
And I had some groups of people who would still end up cooperating.
Oh, yeah.
They're like, just by the natural dynamics of we're playing this game together, I have to help out. And then there were some groups where you would have people who were like gleefully passing me the notes. It was like, so here's the sticky grenade that I have shoved in so-and-so's backpack right before they go in to get their mission briefing from friend computer.
I've known players to make some of the best and worst decisions at the same time. One of my favorites is Exploratory Gnome. Where you take the gnome character, you tie a string around him, and you shove him in a hole.
Yeah.
One of the worst, like, that is the best and worst decision. One, that poor gnome.
Right.
They don't know what they're going into. But sometimes you need to know what's in that hole.
Right.
But sometimes you're extra dumb, and the gnome is the one carrying your bag of holding that has all the evil magic items you've been collecting in it. Yep.
Nice.
Huh. But what happens to the boggle if you've just been shoving evil magic, powerful magic items into this fucking bag?
Right. What happens when the boggle gets tired is like, well, I've got this evil stuff. Time to play with it.
Right. Right? Suddenly you've created David Bowie from Labyrinth. Stealing babies.
Right. That's a happy thought, right?
What happens?
D&D campaign around baby thieving.
Oh, I mean, yeah, hags.
Fair.
I do like the idea, though, of what happens if... Okay, now I'm on this. Now I'm on this with the evil boggle with all the magic items that the party's been collecting over the past, like, couple of months.
Right.
So you have super powerful evil boggle because he's been corrupted by the evil magic. Like, he's not that smart. He's not that... He's a boggle. So like, it's not gonna beat the charisma of the Sword of Cass. Like, it's not gonna happen. Right. So it's the end of the campaign. You've done the thing. The party has won. They've beaten the bad guy. They take his stuff. They throw it in the bag of holding. And now the true villain, who has now all of the magic items that you've been giving to him for free this whole time, is now there to destroy you. But he's been evil for a while now, so has he been collecting people to work for him? Has he been building an empire? He's a super powerful boggle now. Boggles are known to be, like, enthralled by other creatures. Often. Hags included. So is he now in charge of, like, a coven?
Well, have you been carrying the boggle around to help build this army without realizing it?
Right, exactly. Like, what have you done?
Right. I just realized my computer is not plugged in because it's flashing at me. Excuse me a second.
Oh no! Yay!
That was going to be really exciting when I suddenly went away for lack of power.
Stuff like that happens here all the time. We're professionals.
That's right. Always something in the setup.
Back to this morning. Nope. We're having a wonderful conversation, having a great time. I'm not gonna ruin it by dwelling on the past.
Right.
I like this. Fletcher is fascinating to me.
Okay.
Just from what I've heard from Trevor and now what I've heard from you and looking at his character sheet. And now hearing that he was Ron Swanson at one point.
Right.
And now just... I'm gonna want to hear about your guys' campaign more and more and more and more. Because I want to know what happens. I need to know what happens. This is a book.
It has been a lot of fun. And I think especially because, like, Trevor sets up these encounters and sets up these story beats, and we move through them and do what players do, which is just wreck stuff up because we do unexpected things.
Player characters.
Yes. It's like, we've managed to piss off multiple rulers of towns, got, one town bartering brains with the undead in the tower outside town, where like we are making some weird geopolitical moves. Is I guess what
Brains is now a
I'm getting to.
currency. Okay.
Yeah. And like, where are you going to keep getting these brains for this illithid to do stuff with?
Whatever it is they may or may not be doing.
Right. Oh, we had big old brain bats and bubbling kinds of things.
Oh my god!
And then we're like, we have made friends with these goblins. Sure, why not?
This is now a goblin. We're building. That always happens. We're building goblin society.
Yes.
I don't know why this always happens. I don't know if there's been a campaign where I haven't seen people attempt, whether I'm playing or whether I've been a DM, where people attempt to build goblins a town.
Right. Right.
We must come to these tribalistic people and build them a town and bring them society. And I'm like, so are all of you working for Arathis? Like, what is happening? We must bring plumbing to the goblins.
This is a direction we can go in, I guess. Sure.
It always happens, and I feel like more DMs need to throw Neil Boggs in there. Which are, the chaos goblins that are possessed by their. I would love to see if a group truly wanted to save the goblins and make the goblins into like a more advanced, or like into a civilization. They need to save the goblins from Mabugliet. Like the god that conquered all of the goblin tribes.
Right.
But nobody ever wants to save the bugbears or the hobgoblins. They only want to save the little goblins. What?
Yeah, I don't know what. I guess something about feeling like, oh, they're at the bottom of the food chain, and that just arouses sympathy within us. We're like, but what if we did it differently?
And they're small.
And they're wee.
Ignore the fact that it's disemboweling a child over there. Fine.
Right.
Fine.
It'll all work out in the end.
I mean, if you're already bartering brains.
Yes. Yeah.
Can you use magic spells to, like, create a brain?
I mean...
Okay, wait, alright. Create food and water.
So, yeah, that's where I was sort of going, is like, create food and water, we assume is from, like, a humanoid perspective of, we're going to make bread, and we're going to make mead and whatever. But is that, like, species dependent?
Yeah, like, what are you designating as food?
Right.
So
is it the thing that gives you sustenance and you have to live? Like, can vampires basically make blood that way?
I like to imagine that a vampire can, because it just, like, fills their glass while they're sitting there, and it looks cool. Right. But, like, what is that as soon as you're starting, like, what if you're a Zorn? Because Zorn aren't unintelligent, and Zorn, for anybody who doesn't know, they're like one-eyed creatures with extra limbs that live underground and eat gemstones. So, could a Zorn cast create food and make a ruby worth X amount of money?
Right, and if so, then does somebody have that as their gem mining operation?
Right.
Zorn's forced to cast create ruby.
Like, suddenly the economy just goes to shit.
Like, I mean, oh no, we flooded the ruby market.
Okay, but my brain, the people that would do that would be the churches. And they'd be forcing them to make diamonds for resurrection spells and healing magic.
Yeah.
Because that's a whole thing.
Now it's sort of like the D&D version of the alchemist trying to transmute lead into gold. It's like we're transmuting spell power into resurrection by way of Zorn's creating diamonds.
Somebody asked a question earlier about spells. They said, is there a spell or a canon way to make characters into a chimera like Nina from Full Metal Alchemist? Yeah. There's a flesh golem.
Oh yeah.
The flesh golem exists, but also chimeras exist. So you might be able to just polymorph a character into a chimera? But that wouldn't really be putting characters together.
Right. Yeah. Are we talking about like actual smooshing together? Are we talking about like an evolution? We've got one of the panels that we're going to have at DragonCon this year
Yes.
is speculative evolution of monsters. So
That's a good one.
talk about a centaur, talk about a harpy, talk about like what kind of evolutionary pressures get you to a creature that looks like this?
I have got to get you in touch with Dapper Dino. Dapper does a lot of like anti-creationism stuff, so he does a lot of science in that direction, but he has a side project that he does as part of like his Patreon tierage, called the Speculative Evolution Project, where people present him with a creature and is like, okay, let's see what this creature looks like in 5 million years. And so I gotta get you guys in touch, because you guys will just mesh so well over this kind of stuff. Like, what? How did you get a Zorn? How did you get okay, I feel like Illithid are cheating because they're from the Far Realm and the future, so that because time doesn't work in the Far Realm, so whatever, they don't count. They don't count. You can't use them. But like, how do you get a goblin?
I still want someone to explain the flump to me.
I love the flumps. I'm not gonna lie. Flumps are... So I did see somebody speculate that flumps and Grell have a common ancestor.
I'm not as familiar with the Grell as the flump.
The Grell are the floating brains with the hangy tentacles and the beak face.
Okay.
Yeah, and so they're also like aberrants, and they also live in the Underdark, and they're like similar in like their makeup, and so somebody was speculating that, oh, maybe these two things came from another thing, and they posited a monster, but I can't remember. It's like an old like 2nd edition monster that doesn't even like hasn't come up in a long time, and I can't remember what it was called, but it was a really interesting idea. Flumps are my favorite argument for alignment.
Okay.
Because they are lawful good, right? And they're one of the only, if not the only, lawful good aberrants that worship they're basically worship lawful good Cthulhu. And nobody knows the name of. But Flump Society, because the common Flump is what you see in the Monster Manual, but that's like a Flump that doesn't have the abilities that a standard Flump. The reason they're called a common Flump is they're basically a Flump with disabilities. Which is very interesting, because the Flumps are clerics, and the common Flump has no clerical power. So what happens is that anytime a Flump procreates, there is a percentage chance that you get the common Flump. And then the rest of Flump Society kicks them the fuck out. Which is kind of horrible, because you're taking like this,
there.
So they can't cast any clerical magic. They don't have the same intelligence level. This is color based. The Flumps are dependent on what color they are to tell you how strong of a cleric they are, and they have a clerical hierarchy. So depending on what color the Flump is will depend on where it goes in society. So you have a racist, ableist, lawful good society. And it's like, how...
That's a lot right there.
How
That's
are you lawful good? People are out... I've seen people are out here fucking complaining about, well, I want to play a good beholder. And it's like, oh, okay, why do you want to play a beholder? But also, like, oh, well, you can't just call a race evil. And it's like, these guys are lawful good! What do you mean?
Gotta wonder what their praxis is to get them to what that claim of good is.
I imagine that... Well, I mean, they're aberrants.
Oh, yeah.
But I imagine that because of the percentage is a common Flump will always produce another common Flump. It doesn't go the other way. So they live in the Underdark. So when they kick them out, it's a death sentence.
Yeah.
But if it survives and makes more Flumps, they're only going to be common Flumps. So if they allowed common Flumps in their society, they would be overrun by common Flumps because the percentage of them making Flumps is too high.
Right.
So it's the same problem the dwarves have. Dwarves have a percentage, like it's like a 80 or 85 or 90% chance of male dwarf being born from two dwarves. And so dwarf females are very, very rare and highly protected. But because dwarves are very like societally like we are isolated and we don't change our traditions and we are too much the same, they don't they're slowly dying off because they don't have enough women.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing like that in real life, by the way. That's not happening anywhere in the world at all. I don't know what you're talking about. The way to fix it is they need to procreate with humans. Because humans, if they have sex with a dwarf, maintain their 50-50 chance of getting a woman or a man. So the dwarf gene. This is in the books. The dwarf gene is so strong that they produce a mall. They produce a half dwarf, but the dwarf gene is so strong that they basically just produce a dwarf. They get all the dwarf things. They're just like a little bit taller. That's the only difference. And that child maintains that 50-50 chance of making a female dwarf.
Yeah, so I always find it interesting to try to untangle all of that, because it's clearly like they put in something they thought would be cool for flavor, and then you work it out, you're like, ooh. And two, I feel like there are definitely campaigns that have gotten into like D&D eugenics. I'm like, no, thank you.
Right? Like, do we want to play this game?
I like where this is going.
I kind of like the idea of like saving a society that sort of utilizes genetics, like as a players going to the dwarf society and being like, we can help you and we can save you, but now you're trying to change dwarf minds.
Right.
And you're trying to get them to and changing their entire societal structure. And it ends up being a really interesting conversation about what's worth more, your identity as dwarves as a society and their traditions and who they are, and will bringing humans in who are much shorter lived change their society too much, or not respect their society enough, or there's it just expands this whole. Now you start having players being like, oh fuck,
right,
are we the English?
We came here to be colonizers. It's super cool,
right? And it's just like a really bizarre situation, because the society that has the exact opposite problem are orcs.
Yeah.
So are you telling me the orcs are doing it better? What's the answer here? The answer is everyone sucks and nobody wins.
Right. I've been having fun with Fletcher. So his one of his skills is woodworking, and so I finally decided, in keeping with the Ron Swanson theme, I'm like, he just carves stuff. And I forget, early on in the game, I decided that one of the things that Fletcher does is express thanks by giving tiny wood carvings of things. And he spent a lot of time in the Underdark. So what did he carve? So I said, oh yeah, he's going to hand over this little carved flump. So I brought that out, and Trevor cackled, and several people in the game were like, what is this? Like, he carved a flump.
Carves a flump. I love. They're so cute. But I mean, the regular.
Right.
No, they got spikies and acid. They're weird. I mean, they're also racist. So weird. It's so bizarre. And so I don't know, that whole tangent got me onto being like, well, what if alignments didn't work right?
Right.
So I like taking things like that and sort of playing with people's expectations. So at some point I'm gonna have the party run into. They hear this rumor. There's a dragon. This dragon is it's in the mountains. It's up to the north. And is rampaging. Can you help us deal with it? Well, what's the first thing you think of when you think of a rampaging dragon up in the north in the snow?
Right. It's gonna be, you're gonna have the ice and the.
A white dragon.
Yep.
Not a white dragon. It's a silver dragon. Because alignments.
Right.
So I have reasons. There are reasons why the alignments are all messed up. It's not just oh, well, what's your opinion, man? Because this totally messes with what happens when you cast Detect Good and Evil.
Right. Yeah, does it now go along a different axis of the alignment, or different boxes in the grid?
Well, I had two different ideas about the way that spell works standardly, and you tell me what you think, because I'm not sure about this. either it runs through, it's based on who's casting the spell, being that if you're, like, because mostly this is going to be clerics or paladins casting, so it goes through your god. So the magic, it would be like following divine magic in general. If it's not following divine magic and you're using standard magic and you're a wizard casting it, then it would go through the goddess of the weave. Right? So the weave is they're a neutral god anyway, so that works out. The other way I thought of casting it is that it actually goes through Mechanus, period.
Okay.
Being the true neutral, Mechanus acts as a sort of linchpin of, like, identifying on a scale of the wheel where something would fall, and so it will give you, and it might give you more good, more evil, more, but it's like a gradient rather than a, no, this person is evil. It gives you like a, here's the wheel, and then it'll like ping on like somewhere on this wheel. What do you think, though?
I actually like that latter a lot, because what you measure depends on your scale and where you're measuring from. And I really like the idea that you're going to say, well, neutral is sort of the central point,
right?
And therefore, the judgment, and instead of other people getting to say one way or the other, it's like, no, I'm at the center and I can make that judgment.
Right.
So if you change that center, then things get super weird. If you sort of drag the alignment Overton window in one direction or another, or completely turn it.
Right. So, like, how do you define that as like a character? Like, if a character, because a lot of players, well, I shouldn't say players, a lot of characters don't know how their magic works.
Right.
So where does your character then think this alignment bar is coming from? Do they think it's divine, as in their god is telling them this? Or are they like a philosopher-styled wizard who's actually spent time and is like, no, this is coming from Mechanus? And how does a wizard who knows this interact with a religious character who doesn't understand how the planes work?
Right. It seems like that's going to be a point of friction and discussion, because that's two completely different worldviews,
right?
and two different takes on how magic happens. Right. One of it is like study and divine and characterize and categorize, and the other is I pray to my God and stuff happens.
Well, what if it's different depending on if you're casting it as a wizard or if you're casting it as a cleric? So if a cleric casts the spell, it goes through their god and then is measured by that judgment, right? Because their god is the one making the decision of where they would fall to them. So then it's not the player making the decision, not the character making the decision, their god that they're following. Yeah. Which I think would make sense, because that's what a cleric would be asking from that kind of a spell.
Right. Well, and maybe, you're looking at a situation where the existing gods eventually sort of settled on a standard. Like, this is what that is. So if that order gets upended, if new people come in, then is their scale very different?
I don't know what you mean.
Right.
You may or may not have stumbled onto my major plot point.
Sorry.
No. The plot, basically one of the reasons why alignment is messed up is that none of the gods are their originals anymore. So because none of the gods are their originals anymore, they've all been replaced by adventurers who have taken the place of God. The Raven Queen replaced Nerul. The Io is split into Tiamat and Bahamut. So even if this is the original Bahamut, they're still not the original god. So now you're trying to take godhood and their alignments, and you're starting to trickle it down into it being influenced by people who weren't gods and aren't gods, who became gods, who have their own fucking opinions on the matter, right? who grew up as mortals. Right, so now you've taken this, like, what ought to be, like, this pinnacle of lawful good or chaotic evil between Tiamat and Bahamut, and it is now filtered and sort of been what's the word I'm looking for? It's like been watered down.
Hmm.
Like the opposite of distilled.
Right, diluted.
Diluted, thank you. God damn it. It's been diluted into whatever the opinion is of the person who is now currently in charge. And I also made Paylor a giant baby.
Sure.
You've seen the Teletubbies? The
I
son?
have.
The baby son is Paylor.
Oh, Lord.
That's why he still gets the Paylor of the burning hate, because he's a baby throwing a tantrum.
Right.
Got his time. He's a baby.
Different flavor of hate.
Right? He's mad. Big mad baby boy.
Big man, baby boy.
And what's fun is when you have an NPC who interacts with these gods versus the players who may be followers of this god.
Right.
So you get an NPC who's like, your god's a baby.
Right.
God's a literal baby.
Yeah, but that's where I get my power.
Right. It's like, I don't care. Good, let him be. That's not my business. I'm not a god. I can't tell him what to do.
As long as wounds are still getting cured, I mean, do we care who's providing the curing?
It maybe. Is it Asmodeus?
Right. What kind of curing? What counts as curing in this case?
Oh, right? That's a whole nother concept. What is safety?
Right. I mean, purification, that's kind of like curing, right? It's
Absolving your sins in hellfire? That's
right.
It's purifying.
Burn
I run that with Asmodeus. Asmodeus is like, listen, I'm here to do a job, and my job is punishing evil people.
right.
Do you think that evil people shouldn't be punished? Because all my devils know exactly why they're here. They were punished, and they've earned their punishment, and they know it, and now they're trying to do good by punishing other evil people.
Amazing.
Oh no, Asmodeus is right. Shit.
Right.
I love running I am a big fan. Lawful Evil is probably one of my favorite. Just because it's not... It's like the benevolent tyranny, right? One of the ideal societies on paper is a benevolent tyranny. Because you need someone to make the best decision possible for everybody involved. But that's tyranny. Because then that one guy is just coming up with the consequences and what to do about everything. But what if that thing is a god?
Right.
And what if he's not wrong?
Yeah.
This is why I like Dr. Doom so much. Praise be.
Right.
Do you have a favorite god, or do you have a favorite like lore tidbit?
That's a really good question. I have almost never played a character. I guess I need to put cleric on the list of or paladin. Like I always stayed away from paladins, always stayed away from clerics. So I never really got into that. And some of it was just like, I don't know if I can make that interesting for myself. Not, again, this is not a global judgment. This is just for me where
you heard it here. He thinks clerics are boring.
That's right. So, shoot me a DM. That'll be fun. So I kind of started thinking more about that. I don't know if you've read Kieran Gillen's comic Die.
No.
So it is incredibly good. It just finished up its run. And the idea is that like in the 1980s, this group of kids played a D&D like game where they got sucked into the world. So sort of like the ancient D&D cartoon.
Yes.
And then they came back absent the DM and were sort of like broken people thereafter. And then jump forward to closer to current times, they end up getting pulled back in. And it is not D&D, but it is clearly influenced by a bunch of the different tropes.
Right.
So instead of cleric, you have God Botherer, who has to make pacts with the gods to get the godly favor and power.
So are they like a celestial warlock in that case?
Kind of, but one of the things that exists in this RPG world is the idea of emotion knight. So that is the take on the paladin, where instead of being wedded to an alignment, you are wedded to an emotion. And one of the main characters is the grief knight. So the more
Oh
grief
no.
he experiences, the more power he can pull upon as a fighter.
Oh no.
Yes. And someone commented, like, clearly you want to be the happiness knight. And Kieran Gillen's response was, in fact, no, that's incredibly horrifying.
Yes.
All of this is horrifying.
Forced any one thing is bad. That's why I've got my I've set one of my towns up. The main city in the demiplane is a lawful good city but it's gone too far. So it's like, no, there's no taxes. But charity is required. You can pick what God you're giving to, but charity is required. Civil service is required. There is no homelessness. But that's because slavery's a thing. So they just scoop them up and are like, no, we don't have any homeless people here. We give them jobs in the military or doing civil service work. And they get to have a place to live, they get to eat, but they're forced into these basically labor camps.
Right.
And it's like, no, they can leave whenever they want. They just have to pay off their debt. Right. But they also, anytime they make any money, but anytime they make any money, they have to give to charity. So, like, there's no way out. It's like, it's fucked up, but it's lawful, and it's good because they're housing people. They're giving these people an education that they might not have gotten before. If they're an orphan, they're conscripted into the military.
Right.
So now you've got child fighters in your military. But that's good. they're helped.
Oh, that sounds terrible.
Everything is bad.
I've also been watching in our game our cleric who evolved into a paladin.
Oh,
Devrin, who follows my Leaky, and watching how Dal, who plays that character, be in conversation with what does it mean to serve this god, instead of this is sort of a cosmic slot machine where I pull a lever and spells come out, has really made me reconsider. I was like, I think what I had was sort of never experiencing that before, and then a failure of imagination to say this is why it would be interesting to engage with the religious aspects of Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, you definitely get to. It depends on your god too, right? Like the more different gods have like different kind of pulls to them that make them interesting to interact with. So like Meliki, which is the Forgotten Realms nature goddess, basically. So the Melora of fucking. But she's, if I'm not mistaken, she's chaotic good.
Chaotic good.
Right. And if you've read some of the Forgotten Realms literature, like the books, Meliki is like kill all orcs. Genocide. They're evil. Kill them all. It's like, but they made a town over there. They're not attacking anybody yet. You don't know what you're talking about, mortal who's lived like this much time. Off, kill them all or else.
Right.
And so now you start dealing with a mortal character trying to grapple with the true alignment of whatever their deity is.
Yeah.
So like I find that can be really, because what the fuck do you know?
Right.
Who are you?
You don't have access to the same level of information and experience. You're gonna swap your judgment for mine?
Right. And you also have no idea what the god is contending with on their level. They might be like, oh shit, if this group of orcs gets too strong, then Gromsh gets too. And if Gromsh gets too strong, he teams up with Bane, and we have a fucking problem on our hands. So Meliki is like, no, we're just gonna nip this in the bud real quick. But the players are like, but they haven't done anything. And it's like, no, them existing is doing something. But should they then not be allowed to exist? The god's like, yeah. But as far as the god's concerned, it's like, this is a rat infestation. Get the fuck out of here.
Yeah. Well, it definitely doesn't help that I started playing during the peak of Satanic Panic when all of that kind of got played down.
Right.
We're like, no, they're not demons. No, we're not gonna call them that.
Uh, uh, and then there's just a matter of like, oh no, you've made friends with some of these people, and now your god is telling that they're evil. You need to
Right.
kill all of their people. And
Right.
sometimes they're also racist, and they're like, yeah, kill them. I hate orcs. But you're an
Yeah.
orc. Yeah, I know. That's why I hate orcs.
Right.
I'm a gung-ho for this. It's just an interesting interaction. And it also, like, super depends on your DM. Super duper depends on your DM. Some
Right.
DMs are down to clown on this kind of stuff. Other DMs are like, no, I stay away from all racism in any way, shape, or form. I stay away from anything that able, like the flumps. They might not even allow that kind of society to exist in their world, monster or
Right.
otherwise. And that's totally valid. That's totally fair. If you're not comfortable playing that kind of stuff, not comfortable with it, or you have somebody at your table who's not comfortable with playing around or in that kind of scenario, this is all about consent. So if you
Right.
don't want to play it, you shouldn't have to. It's not like the game requires you to have evil drow or ableist flumps.
Right. Well, and that's, also thinking about how to be careful and sensitive in
Yes.
approaching these topics.
Yes.
I think about one of the RPGs that I played before is Spirit of the Century, which is it draws inspiration from the 1920s and 1930s pulp adventures. It's basically set up to tell those stories. And they've got a whole big section is like, okay, so here's a lot of the stuff that was also part of the pulps. And you need to be cautious about just willy-nilly importing in some of the racism and some of the sexism and some of all the
Right.
issues that pulp adventures had and took for granted. The mysterious East, like, just you need to think before you just dive into that.
Yeah, I saw some RPG had written the Silk Road, and I was sitting with my co-host on a show Friday called Dumbfeck Friday, and we were this guy's stream because he was talking about like he was talking about like abortion rights, but using like a weird D&D platform to do it, and it's like, what the fuck is going on? And so we looked at that, but then we take a look at his book, and one of the tags in his table of contents was roles of women, and I just went, oh no. Oh no, you thought this needed a time like in your table of contents? It's not like, oh hey, disclaimer, in this time period, women were treated this way, da da da. Like that would make sense, but you have a section? And it's just like, well, and I hear the argument already. Oh, well, we're trying to be realistic. It's underneath magic. Bruh.
Right.
I'm trying to have this realistic setting. Magic!
Right. Well, and realism can be important, but it's not necessarily the be all end goal. Like you said, with magic and things like that. Like you can work out what is an important part of the games you are playing, the enjoyment you're having, and the stories you're telling.
I think it's definitely interesting as someone of the female variety. I actually don't have a problem with people having sexism in the game, as long as it's not like so oppressive that I can't play.
Right.
But if I go into a town and I'm playing a female character and people are like, "What are you doing adventuring? You're a woman." I'm like, I'm stronger than you are. Shut up. Like that's not a
Right.
problem for me or generally the characters that I tend to play along the lines of. Even my characters that are like a little bit more softer are just like, "Oh, well, I'm just about it. Oh, by the way, bees.
Yeah. Bees.
Throw bees at you."
Well, and I think one of the things that can come out of cooperative play in something like a TTRPG is exploration of things, as long as everyone, like you said, is down to clown, and is being thoughtful about it. It's why I really appreciate the move to like discussing ahead of time. What are things that I absolutely am uninterested in having as part of this game world? What are things that, if they occur, I wanted to like draw a veil across it so that we move past it.
Yeah, I
So
think there's
you're
one
gonna,
thing. Yeah, I think it's one thing to know that like assaults happen in the world, but it's not happening to your character. You might see it happening in an alley, and you might decide to intervene on the situation and prevent that, and maybe make societal changes to like change the politics of the area. And I think that's
Mhm.
an interesting thing to explore. But I've heard horror stories. I've heard some horror stories where it's
That's
just
true.
like that's no, that's not cool. But I'm also not gonna poo-poo on somebody's game when it's like their home game that they keeping to themselves and everybody at the table's agreed and they want to do they're all evil characters doing horrible shit in their basement. I'm like, okay, well, that's fine. That doesn't harm me any or doesn't really hurt anybody.
Yeah.
So I don't want to play in your game, but I'm not going to tell you not to play it. I don't know, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, but okay. I don't know if that's just a me thing. Do you think that like maybe that needs to get stomped on? Because I've seen that a little bit.
I don't know. And that's something that I struggle with because I do want there to be expression and exploration in DDRPGs. I think there are elements that can be harmful. I think not only consent, but sort of in a broader, what are we doing with this? And I say that as someone who can enjoy, like, we're going to have just the romp and somp evil campaign.
So we're
Like,
gonna
again,
enslave this whole group of people. We're gonna beat people up. We're gonna like I'm making a harem.
there
Whatever.
can
Yeah.
be some catharsis in that.
Yeah.
And there can be some artistic exploration in that. And I don't want to foreclose on all of that. But at the same time, I especially anything that I am putting out in the world, um,
Yes.
or that is going to go out beyond the group that has originally signed up for that. I want to be thoughtful about it and thoughtful about what I am putting out into the world. Um, I think it's important to watch because people may discover as you're playing through something like that, oh, wait, actually, I'm not good with that. Okay, so you need to be able to
Yeah.
stop, step back, and talk through that.
I was talking about I have a thing I haven't released it, but I've been mulling it over for a while, and I was talking about how way people are upset about a line, way people are upset about well, Drow have a dark, and I remember being like, the wizard picture, like of the wizard in the fifth edition handbook, is black. Their skin tone isn't why they're bad. There's this is also not they're not a free race either. They've been influenced by their god who is chaotic evil and is a very active god because not all the gods are as active. And then I was like, but none of this matters. Play the game how you want to play it, but also you can replace it with gnomes if you want. It can be any race. It doesn't have to be, oh, the drow, Lolth did this thing and the drow, da 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 da. You could just say, oh, the hill dwarves did this thing and da 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 da. And so now they're the ones under control. Chaotic idiot. Like, there's no tying to the drows specifically if you don't want to use drow.
Yeah. I certainly get the impulse that, historically, within the game, this is how it has been set up. And there is discomfort if you have grown up with it that way, just to be like, we're changing it and we're changing it because we think it was bad. There is that sort of ego injury of like, are you saying I'm bad?
Right.
I absolutely get that response. I can sympathize with it without also saying, so it's totally cool. We're just going to leave everything as is.
Yeah.
I think that's just part of wrestling with the legacies of any kind of something like D&D that has been around and is coming out of society, and it reflects the society.
Yeah.
And
It's not the Bible. It's not a sacred text, guys.
well, and okay, so you didn't think about that, and it's okay to then think about it and adjust your think. Like that's one of the things that
Right.
I have to do over the years is sort of keep reevaluating and saying, okay, now I see how I would do things differently or how I would approach this differently, or I actually am okay with changing that.
Yeah.
I've gotten to be a lot looser about, originally it was like growing up Forgotten Realms and having all of this information and you know,
This is the way the world is.
and playing Neverwinter Nights and being like, oh, this is what D&D is. And then realizing it's okay to have had those experiences and remember those and enjoy those. And changing things now does not invalidate what was.
Yeah, yeah. And I think there's people think hacking their. Well, my game wasn't like that. That wasn't a problem in my game. Like, good. If you don't want to change it, and nobody at your table wants to change it, and it's your home game, okay.
Police are not coming for you.
Right. No, like, who's gonna who's gonna stop you? But there's also, like, I could not express how much 5th edition does not care. 5th edition just, here's the entire philosophy of the way the multi-planes works. It's like a page.
Right.
Like, it doesn't care. And then if you notice, in that, it also writes in a caveat saying, individuals are individuals. They even do it for monsters. At the beginning of the monster manual, there's like a paragraph like this long that's like, hey, these are just a baseline to give you an idea of how something might interact. Individuals will be individuals, though, so make them whatever you want. Right. And then I'm watching people argue online about, well, what if I want to play? What if there's a good beholder? And it's like, okay, make a good beholder then. Like, why are you fighting about this?
I think in part because we love, a lot of us got into D&D and loved the systems and the lore, and there was all this stuff built out, fleshing out this world. Why are people so excited about Spelljammer?
Yes.
It's because it's updating, you know, this concept from the 80s and 90s. You know, why was I excited to get to play the 3.5 edition version of Tomb of Horrors? Because it was a classic thing that I had never gotten to experience back in the day.
Yeah.
And so I can understand people being like, I like that stuff, and I don't want it changed. And I can also understand why TSR is like, look, things need to evolve. We are trying to broaden and make this a game that a lot more people can play and be comfortable playing and don't have to like shave off bits of who they are to actually enjoy this.
Oh, hey, do you want us to just release the same game again? Like, why would we do that? That already, nobody is, if you have the 3.5 books, if you have the 4e books, play 4th edition. Nothing is stopping you from playing older editions of the game if you want to. There's just not making new content. There are people still making content for it, though. If you go looking, you can absolutely find that shit. Play it! I wouldn't understand the problem.
I know people who are still making computer games that look like the old Ultima tile-based computer games. Like,
yes.
And I actually enjoy seeing that there are people who are continuing to do that. I enjoy Dungeon World, you know, saying, what if we tried to strip this down to a less mechanistic, more freewheeling version, like occasionally would happen back in the 1st edition days? What would that look like? I think that's really neat. I think it's great to see people trying to capture different aspects of the game because there are so many different ways to approach it, you know, as a storytelling game, as a war game, as a proof that you are super good with math and did math better than the other people and can now put out more damage per second than everyone else.
Right, yeah.
But you absolutely can munchkin it. And, you know, sometimes it's like, oh, that's a bad word. Well, not if everybody is like, that's what we're on board for. That's what we want to do, is just see numbers go up and show that we maximize them.
So Smitty makes an interesting point, and we'll probably do this, then we'll our last little roundup, get on out of here, because we are getting close to the 2-hour mark. Smitty said, it's valid to care about official canon if people think that the reason for changing the lore is stupid and that it's being done to appeal to the lowest common denominator. It's not surprising they would feel upset that it is evolving, not evolving the way they prefer. I don't know what the official canon would be considered for something like Dungeons & Dragons, though. Because there kind of isn't. Like, right now, 5th edition is utilizing Forgotten Realms, but Forgotten Realms also has a number of authors, and that's, like, I guess Forgotten Realms would be considered the official canon of 5th edition. But 4th edition didn't use Forgotten Realms as their official canon.
Right.
There's still Dragonlance. There's
I was going to say,
Greyhawk.
is Tanis half elf canon?
Right, right. No, exactly. Dark Sun has a whole different lore set and a different active and not active gods. So what would the canon of D&D be? Owlbears, for example, which we've talked about since the thing came out about whether or not they're a monstrosity or whether or not they're a beast, whatever they are. Every edition have been something different. But right now they're considered monstrosities, and the edition before that they were fae. So
I certainly think that like the collaborative and evolving nature of something like Dungeons and Dragons means that this stuff is going to flex and things will come in and out of canon.
and people
You know,
are gonna
sometimes
run their
the
game.
universe gets wiped away.
Yeah.
I also want to think carefully about what is meant by the lowest and lowest common denominator. Is that what on what metric are we making that judgment?
Yeah.
Because I think that can lead to some if we're not careful, it can lead us to some of the, well, you're not a real player, you're not a, you because you don't care about the lore, you're not actually interested in Dungeons and Dragons,
Like
which
being dismissive of somebody's are also just valid. So, I mean, it makes me think of like the Book of Erotic Fantasy. Is the Book of Erotic Fantasy canon in Dungeons and Dragons? Technically, it was an official book that came out. So does that mean everybody needs to utilize the rules or what works at or make their game involve that level of, I don't know, like sex RP? I guess so you would call that.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's funny to be like, the bard wants to cast enlarge on his dick. Okay, but here's a rule set.
Right.
So, like, how much of that is
to make that happen?
canon, right? So, I don't know. I think it's just an interesting idea.
Well, and I definitely don't want to dismiss the emotion around something that you loved and how it changes, and being interested in what is officially coming out from the company behind,
Yes, yeah.
because that is real and valid. And that's anytime you've got a long running thing like this, there's going to be multiple competing points of view that they end up moving around and trying to flex back and forth among.
They're trying to navigate, right?
Yeah, I think about how like fourth edition, there definitely was that feel of like Mamorpigas are eating our lunch, so what we need is to pull in some of those mechanics. That's what the kids today love. Now, I'm being a little snide there. I actually, again, really enjoyed playing fourth edition.
I started with
like,
fourth edition.
yeah, and that's great. And then they said, well, that's actually not doing what we wanted to do. Let's change that some. And I think that you see that flex with the official things that they put out in terms of the story world around the mechanics.
Yeah.
And so I definitely don't want to dismiss feelings that like this isn't where I wanted to see this go.
There's also like a degree of potentially feeling like left behind by a company, by a group
Right.
that you've been a part of, especially when it comes to that particularly when it first started 80s. There were the people who were playing were people who were felt isolated from they were the nerds, they were the geeks, jocks, they didn't have anything else. So now this thing that they've attached their identity to, the company is, if they feel like the company is leaving them behind, that's gonna be very harmful and hurtful. So lashing out, right, or being like, well, this isn't my D&D, is like, that's fine. That okay, it doesn't have to be, but I can understand that it's like, well, now I'm never gonna get any content.
Well, that's one of the dangers. Danger is the wrong word. I think that is just one of the things that happen when you engage with what in the end is a corporate IP designed to make a company money. At that point, they're going to decide what kind of audiences they are interested in, what kind of approaches that they want to do, and they will make those changes. And you can make your voice heard, but that doesn't mean that they're going to listen. It also doesn't mean it is okay then to try to affect change through more awful ways, like a number of women and femme presenting people I know in this space who have been attacked for being in the space. Like, that's not cool. That doesn't, that's awful.
As a girl playing Xbox Call of Duty.
Yeah.
2002. The interesting thing is, well, I mean, all of this isn't, but there's something to be said about what has actually, people were pissed when 4th edition came out. People were pissed. Like, they hate, I don't know which had more hate. 5th edition being like, yeah, but we don't really care about alignments, use them if you want. Or being like, here's a card game.
Right.
I don't, because the reason people were mad about 4th edition was very, very, very streamlined. And very, very much like, you don't get to you get to decide what you do, but the game decides on what happens. So it's like, listen, you pick your spell, but you don't get to flavor your spell. You don't get to decide like how it does this specific thing that it's hard. Whereas 5th edition I find 5th edition to me so far has been my favorite because it kind of takes the simplicity of 4th edition and like takes 3rd edition, which 3.5, which just became this nightmare of like so much, and then just sort of be like, okay, we're gonna slim this out, and we're gonna take out, like, you don't need to have swimming and jumping and climbing. It's all athletics now. And 4th edition, but adding to 4th edition and being like, okay, listen, you should be able to decide if you want to cast Fireball, like, okay, here's how the spell works, here's what it does, do what you want with it. So it, like, kind of bottlenecked and then opened back up again.
Right. 4th very much felt like it was going back towards some of the wargaming roots, where it's like, no, we're going to have specific rules about how these things happen.
Yeah.
Which froze out some of the more creative aspects of taking the mechanics and then building on those, or adjusting them for effects that weren't spelled out. I mean, that is the D&D that spawned an entire D&D alternative, right? Like, what if 3.5 updated?
Right. And I mean, and that's exactly it, right? So who's to say that if you don't like for lore changes don't fucking matter in Dungeons and Dragons. Like, that, you do what you want. It's your DM that's doing all this shit anyway.
It's fun to have nerd arguments about it.
I mean, yes. Yes, it is.
I seem to recall the trailer breakdown y'all did of a certain D&D movie that's coming, right?
Oh, it's so much fun to, like, pick it all apart and be like, what's happening? But is that movie now the official canon?
I mean, it did give me a gelatinous cube, so I'm very excited.
3 dragons? What the man, I didn't expect, like, all the movies that have, like, 1 dragon, you know, except for the initial Dungeons had, like, a shitload of dragons, but none of them mattered. They were, like, fodder dragons, which is kind of a thing, I guess. I don't know, fodder dragons. But this movie has at least 2 named dragons, and probably a 3rd name. Like, I'm not sure if the black dragon is going to be named, but there's absolutely that gold stone golem dragon, probably Bahamut.
Mm-hmm.
And then our big chunky boy in the basement. What do you think about the movie?
I hope it's good.
You're excited?
I actually did get excited from the trailer. I was like, okay, so they're doing sort of a thiefy, heisty thing in D&D, which is absolute catnip to me.
Oh, yeah.
It looks like they're taking a lot of the fun parts of Dungeons and Dragons, and if they can turn that into an actual fun cinematic experience, I'm all for it. I was just going to say, you know, and if they've got nice nods for people who have been playing it and are familiar with some of the elements of it, like the cube and all that kind of stuff, where you're like, I think I am down for that.
Can't say who, say what, but I can say that I have been informed to pay attention to the background, because I know a guy who might know some things. It's like, yo, there are some things that are not going to be necessarily in the foreground that you might want to pay attention to. That's all I can say. But
Yeah.
this is gonna be one of those movies you're gonna have to watch it a couple times to catch all the like shit going on. It's just like,
I did have that sort of moment of ice in the veins where the Hasbro is in the title cards. I was like, oh, the people who brought me Battleship the movie.
oh no. Although a like kaiju battle D&D. And then you'd have people arguing about the stat blocks of the monsters that he used.
It does, like, the advance in CGI does mean that you could potentially have a Dungeons and Dragons movie that goes way bonkers in some of the more weird things. Like, do we get to go to Sigil at some point? I would love that.
Oh my god, Sigil would be so complicated. Sigil.
Oh yeah.
I want to nerd out more. I want to nerd out all of the time. Oh my god, there's so much shit. Okay, we're at the 2-hour mark, so we gotta wrap up. What do you got going on? Chill.
The big thing is the game that it's changed titles a couple of times. I have to remember on the final one that we got, because it was originally called Elements of Pattern Magic, but it turns out that the crafting blogs and crochet books own the term pattern magic. Like, if you search for pattern magic, that's all that's going to come up. So it is now Professor of Magical Studies, where you play a professor at a mundane school that has a magical department that is hidden, and you just got hired and you're trying to get tenure.
Oh my god, that's amazing. Is it?
So it's all Magic Academia.
I have you and your website linked down below. Definitely go check that out. But if you that, I will add that to the description down below. Go and check that out. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it tremendously.
We got into like such like way deeper topics than I thought we were getting into. Just talking about like the psychology of a player and the like putting a player in a character. I want to do a specific one talking about.
Absolutely should.
Maybe we'll get like a. But we will cut it there for now. Like and subscribe and all that. Go check out his links below. Go check out Steven's links below. They're gonna be fantastic. I assure you, read the about page. You don't understand. I got this man, worked for NASA, got shot by a laser beam, has done theater, is a physics, right?
Physics.
Is physics. And I'm sitting here being like, D&D though.
Are you kidding? Love talking about this. Love talking about it.
I can't believe it. I know too many smart people who do so much cool things, and then I'm just like, but D&D.
Right.
We don't listen. I understand that you have so much to add to society, studying all the fancy, awesome things that you study, and we can learn so much from you. But D&D, though.
I am here for the D&D, though.
I have found my place in the universe. All right, I'm getting out of here. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Have a good night, everybody. Bye-bye. I should probably have a black screen. There we go.